Obviously, the Second Amendment provides the right for people to bear arms. While some think that this amendment should be upheld, others think that it should be adjusted. Liberals tend to think that it should be adjusted in the sense that a citizen should not be able to obtain and use a military-grade weapon, while Republicans are very, very libertarian on this argument. Libertarian means they are anti-government regulation, and therefore they don't believe that the government should be able to take their personal property. So parts of the brain, again, it comes back to the anterior cingulate cortex for liberals. This is because they are radically anti-gun because of fear, and fear is commonly associated with this lobe and part of the brain. On the other hand, it comes back again to the amygdala. So left versus right brain thinking, I would make the claim that they are both right thinking on this topic because their opinions are revolved around feelings. Basically, they are both pro/anti-gun because of fear. They are pro-gun because they don't want intruders or whatever. Therefore, they are fearful that people are going to harm them. Therefore, they want their guns. And on the other side of the spectrum, they want guns taken away because they feel that guns will harm them. I would make the claim that they are both right-brain thinking because of that. So let's move on to economic policy. Our last of 4 topics here today. I call it taxes, you could call it capitalism v. socialism, but I just dumbed it down to taxes policy. So the definition of taxes is obviously the concept of the government mandatorily taking away your money to provide for society in your town. So for example, money being taken away from a collective group of people to fund a school, roads, that type of thing. Liberals tend to not care as much, and they tend to give away their money to the government more freely, and therefore that the government spends it on things that they find appropriate, while conservatives are much more stingy with their money, and they do not like the concept of giving away money to the government to provide for other people. I would make the claim, again, that the anterior cingulate cortex is responsible for liberals thinking this way because they have overwhelming feelings of sympathy and they are okay with giving away their money to the government because they feel the government is going to provide for others in need. While I would, again, make the claim that the amygdala is responsible for the conservative way of thinking in this particular policy because the amygdala is responsible for survival tactics, thoughts of my money come into play. I would also make the claim that they are both right-brained because this revolves around personal finance and then subjective feelings. So now that we've covered a bit about the brain and how the brain affects politics, let's talk a bit about how the brain and politics affect sociology. Sociology can be defined as how people interact in society. So let's talk a bit about tolerance. Tolerance is a big part of society. Without tolerance in this diverse nation, we wouldn't be able to succeed as a collective unit. This is why it's an overwhelmingly scary fact that as political diversity is on the rise, tolerance is at an all-time low. For example, as we saw in the 80s, Congress members from both political parties were friends, they would have civil discussions, and then they would go out and get a bite to eat and a quick drink. Nowadays, policies are so crazy and they are so anti-tolerant to each other in Congress, they won't even talk. That was supported by Senator Ted Cruz. As we see in the diagram to the right, most people who identify with one party classify the other party as closed-minded, dishonest, immoral, unintelligent, and lazy. So a lot of people who associate with a party call the other party bad things, and they think ill of the other side. This is something that is very crucial in today's politics, and I think that is why extreme occurrences of intolerance come to rise. So let's talk a little bit about extreme intolerance. As we hear on the news, collective groups of people are always being targeted, whether it's sexual orientation, race, viewpoint, gender, religion, ideology, etc. People are always being killed for their beliefs, their race, stuff that they are being born with. One example of that is Dylan Roof, who shot up Charleston all-black church, and he said this because he was trying to start a race war. He was so deeply conservative. He was so far conservative that he wanted to kill any minority, otherwise known as blacks in this particular circumstance, to start a race war. Another conservative who acted in violence was a man named Robert Lewis, behind me, who shut up a Planned Parenthood because obviously he disagreed with the procedures going on inside of that facility. He killed 7 people, it looks to be, in just an act of violence against a different group of people. Finally, we have Gabriel Giffords, who shot a U.S. representative, a Democratic U.S. representative, for an ideological difference. Extreme occurrences of intolerance happen always, and that is my one and only objective goal here today. We need to find out why these psychological differences are in place and why and how it affects others. So let's talk a bit more about that. Let's talk about political opinions and friendships. Psychology Today notes that talking politics with a friend that disagrees with you can change your perception about that friend. So I would advise you guys listening at home, do not talk politics with someone who disagrees with you, because your perception of them and their perception of you can radically change and friendships can be altered. One thing that I also found interesting, though, that people who have the same political viewpoint and share them amongst themselves actually report being less happy. This is because, obviously, if you are expressing your unhappiness with the current government or whatever it is, you are going to carry those feelings onto your current day life, and therefore you are going to be more happy. So my advice would be just keep politics out of your friendships. It's only going to hurt your friendships unless you are in a family or something like that, and just keep your thoughts to yourself. So, we covered a little about political influence, but let's talk a little bit more. Red is obviously Republican, and blue is obviously Democrat on the chart behind me. As we can see to the picture on the right, most counties are radically right or left wing, and this is because of influence. We talked a bit about this, but this is because people go through generations. So for example, parents are influencing the children's thoughts, and this is why we have such a diverse nation, because people in California are radically blue, but people in Texas are radically red. I mean, we see states right here that are all red, when we see states over here which are practically all blue. It's really crazy to think that we are just separated by borders, but those borders are almost ideologically differ us from the rest of our nation. And that's very, very interesting to think. So, in conclusion, the brain is an ever-changing structure. For example, your beliefs can actually change the mold of your brain. For example, if you are radically conservative, your amygdala can be developed through your ideology, and vice versa with the anterior cingulate cortex with liberals. And the main psychological difference between liberals and conservatives are just brain structure, and that is it. We are all humans with differences, and the best way to accept these differences is tolerance. That's all I have for today. Thank you. Back to you, Mr. Close.